One day, Charles, my husband, dropped a bombshell. He knew about the $6 million inheritance I had received after my father passed away. Ihot keptita secret. Unsure of how to handle our strained marriage, I was contemplating divorce due to his controlling behavior and growing greed. His knowledge hit me like a slap in the face. Before I could even process it, he grinned and suggested we use the money to remodel our family home. When I confronted him, he admitted that he had pressured my mother into revealing the secret. His boldness infuriated me, and even as I protested, he brushed me off, telling me it didn't matter and the decision had already been made. I'm Patricia, 31, a bank employee with a demanding job that left little room for a personal life. That's why I turned to a matchmaking agency, where I met Charles, a cheerful delivery driver a year older than me. Our connection was instant, and before long, we were engaged with marriage on the horizon. At first, our marriage was filled with love, and Charles constantly praised my work ethic and success, something I'd worked hard for and that surpassed his own achievements. But over time, his admiration turned into sarcasm, particularly about my income. To my surprise, my once supportive in-laws began to grow distant. They'd been excited about our future, but the warmth they once showed was replaced with tension, especially when it came to money. I started questioning not just my relationship with Charles, but the true intentions of everyone around me. The behavior of my in-laws soon made their expectations clear. Since you have a good job, Patricia, why don't you buy us some things once in a while? My mother-in-law said one day, her tone expectant. She'd just received a dress from me for her birthday, but it wasn't enough. I refused to lend or borrow money, even within family, and this upset them greatly. How dare you? We only accepted this marriage because of your job at the bank. Frankly, we can't stand you. You're too outspoken. My mother-in-law snapped. What good is a daughter-in-law who won't support us? We expect birthday gifts, cash, and yet you refuse? My father-in-law joined in, scolding me as well, while Charles remained silent, offering no defense. You make good money, so you should be able to help out, he added, as though my financial obligations should solely fall on me. Faced with constant demands and a lack of support from Charles and his family, divorce seemed like the only way out. At least we didn't have children, which made the decision a little easier. Every time I tried to talk to Charles about it, he shut me down. Divorce? I'm too tired to talk about that today. I'm going to bed, he'd say, dodging any serious conversation. Then, one evening, I got a call from my mother that would change everything. Patricia, listen carefully. It's about your dad, she said, her voice tight with worry. She explained that my father's condition had worsened, and he needed immediate hospitalization. I rushed to the hospital, and as I was about to leave, Charles asked where I was going. I'm going to see my dad, I told him, realizing yet again that I was handling things on my own. His indifferent response, given the gravity of the situation, stung, but I pushed it aside, knowing I needed to be there for my family. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed the worst. My father had cancer and only a short time left. My mother and I debated whether to tell him the full truth, but ultimately, we decided he would want to know. When I returned home, heartbroken and exhausted, Charles asked, "Back from the hospital? How bad is it?" I told him about my father's prognosis, and his response was as cold and self-centered as I feared. "Oh, weren't you talking about divorce? If you want to stress your already sick father with our problems, I'm ready whenever you are." His callousness shocked me, but what hurt even more was that I hesitated to bring more pain to my father because of Charles's cruel attitude. As time went on, Charles seemed almost pleased by the emotional toll all this was taking on me. He then asked the most unexpected and hurtful question of all, about my father's inheritance. "So, what's the deal with your dad's inheritance? How much are we talking about? Since I'm your husband, I should get a share, right?" Charles asked, his voice dripping with entitlement. I was stunned by his audacity, especially considering my father was still fighting for his life. "Are you serious? My dad is still alive. How can you even think about that right now?" I snapped, my anger rising, but Charles wasn't fazed. He continued to speculate about the potential inheritance, his greed palpable, and it made my stomach turn. I couldn't stand being in that house any longer. The tension was unbearable, and I needed to be closer to the hospital to support my father. I told my mother that I was moving in with her for the time being. Not long after, my father passed away peacefully, as if he had simply drifted into sleep. The loss was crushing, and in those quiet moments with my mother, I realized how much we still had to face. The grief was all-consuming, and although it felt like we had cried every tear, there were still funeral arrangements to be made. In the midst of this sorrow, I reached out to Charles to let him know about my father's death and the upcoming funeral. Despite everything, I felt I had to inform him. After all, we were still married. His response was as cold and heartless as I'd feared. "So, your dad finally passed away, huh? Sorry for your loss, but I don't feel like going to the funeral. It's too much of a hassle," he said, his voice indifferent. His lack of empathy confirmed everything I had feared about him. I'd secretly hoped he would show some respect, maybe even attend the funeral, but his apathy only deepened my disdain for him. "Do whatever you want," I replied, my voice icy. surprising myself with the sharpness of my tone. But I'm curious, what about the inheritance? His words were laced with mockery. Oh, you're really hung up on that, huh? His laughter echoed in the background as I hung up the phone, unable to listen to any more of his cruel jabs. Charles didn't attend my father's funeral. Some people called him heartless, but to me, it was a relief. His absence spared us the added pain of his presence on such a solemn day. Afterward, my family and I discussed my father's estate. Thankfully, my father had made arrangements ahead of time, which allowed us to settle things quickly and find some closure. When I returned home, I was once again blindsided by Charles. Hey, it's been a while. I've decided I'm going to use that $6 million you inherited to renovate the family house, he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I was speechless. How did he even know about the money? Why did he think he had any right to it? What are you talking about? I don't know anything about a large sum of money, I replied, bewildered. Charles grinned smugly. I had a little chat with your mom. I might have given her a little nudge, told her that if she didn't spill the beans about the inheritance, I might consider a divorce. She caved pretty quickly. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. He had threatened my mother to get the information he wanted. You're despicable. How could you do that to my mother? I yelled, fury building inside me. That's just low. I don't care, he said casually, as if his actions were insignificant. The renovations are already in progress with your $6 million. Looks like I'm the lucky one for marrying you. Good thing we're still together. Charles had already started using the inheritance for his own plans. While I was still reeling from the loss of my father, I was left in stunned silence, betrayed by the man I had once trusted. I was forced to confront the reality of Charles's manipulative and self-serving nature, realizing that drastic measures were needed to end our crumbling marriage. His smirk was sickening as he laid out an ultimatum, his voice dripping with feigned generosity. You have two choices, he said, move in with my parents or file for divorce. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with unwavering calm. I choose divorce, and I won't regret it. Charles laughed dismissively, certain that I would soon regret my decision. From now on, we'll communicate through this lawyer, he said, handing me a business card. Then, with a hint of demand, he added, and don't forget to transfer the inheritance to my account. With a mix of fury and resolve, I silently began packing my things. As I reached the door, his voice trailed behind me like an unwelcome echo. Don't forget about the inheritance. Afterward, I explained everything to my mother. She was shocked, unaware of just how strained my relationship with Charles had become. She apologized for sharing the inheritance details, pressured by Charles. It's okay, Mom, I should have been more open, but him threatening you is unforgivable, I reassured her. I then asked if I could stay at our family home until I found a place of my own, and she agreed without hesitation. The following day, Charles bombarded me with calls, all of which I ignored. His persistence eventually led him to show up at my parents' house, ringing the doorbell incessantly and making a scene. My mother, concerned by the disturbance, suggested I speak with him. It might not fix anything, but if he escalates, we'll call the police, she advised. Understanding her worry, I reluctantly agreed. With the security chain fastened, I opened the door just a crack. This is getting out of hand, Patricia. When are you transferring that $6 million? I can't finish the renovations without it, Charles shouted, shaking the door. I stayed calm, my voice even. It's under consideration. Charles looked confused. What do you mean, under consideration? Taking a breath, I clarified. What I inherited was my father's vacation home. It's a property, not cash. I can't just transfer it to you. Charles's face fell, sensing an opportunity to turn the tables. I pushed further. And how did you manage to secure a $6 million renovation contract without any proof of funds? He hesitated, then admitted, well, I have a relative who owns a construction company. I told them I'd be receiving $6 million soon, so they skipped the usual checks. If that's the case, I began, letting the sentence hang as I closed the door with a firm thud, cutting off any further discussion. Inside, I felt a mix of relief and clarity. I knew distancing myself from Charles was the right choice, and I was ready to begin a new chapter in my life, free from his manipulations. I warned you before we even talked about divorce, I said sternly, hearing Charles fumble in a panic on the other side of the door. I made it clear this could happen. You've got to be kidding me, Charles barked, frustration thick in his voice. I already paid a $5,000 deposit for the renovations. I was going to cover the rest in installments. Now what am I supposed to do? He continued to grasp at straws. The wife's property is the husband's too, right? Even if it's not cash, you need to hand over that $6 million vacation home. We're still married, aren't we? You've got it all wrong, Charles, I replied firmly. Inherited property isn't shared, it's mine, and mine alone. Not a cent belongs to you, and just so we're clear, we're not a couple anymore, we're strangers. Charles's desperation shifted to fury. His face turned red as he shouted louder. Stop playing games, I'm calling off the divorce, give me the inheritance right now, he yelled, trying to push through the crack in the door. My mother, witnessing the escalation, quickly dialed the police. Charles withdrew his hand when he heard her on the phone but then, with a sneer, declared, "I'm done with you," before storming off. When the police arrived, they reviewed the footage from the doorbell camera and assured me they'd take appropriate action. They stressed the importance of my safety and advised me to avoid any further engagement with Charles. They instructed me to keep the doors locked and, if necessary, pretend I wasn't home. 5 days later, I received a call from the police. They were asking about the documentation related to my father's real estate. After moving back into my parents' house, I had packed the documents with me, but they were now missing. The police confirmed that they had recovered them. I went to the station to retrieve the papers, but to my shock, I found Charles there. He was the thief who had stolen the documents. Furious, I demanded an explanation. With a grim expression, Charles muttered, "You thought there'd be cash in your bag because you inherited $6 million, right? When I went through your stuff, I found some documents that looked important, so I decided to take them." He went on to explain that, at the time, he hadn't bothered to examine the papers closely. Only after I clarified that the $6 million wasn't cash did the reality of his actions begin to sink in. Driven by desperation and misguided assumptions, Charles had taken the documents, thinking it was his ticket to something more. When he realized the documents he'd stolen were for a vacation property, not liquid cash, he decided to convert the inheritance into money. He took the property title to a real estate agent, hoping to sell it. My in-laws accompanied him, no doubt thinking they could work some magic. But when I arrived at the office, it quickly became clear that the sale couldn't happen. The title was still in my father's name, and the inheritance division had only just been finalized. I was in the process of transferring it to my name, and even if everything was settled, the property was legally mine. Without my consent, Charles couldn't sell it. Frustrated, I confronted them, and to my disbelief, they suggested I buy the property myself, since it belonged to my father-in-law. This absurd claim caused the real estate agents to call the police, likely because of Charles's aggressive behavior, which had raised suspicions. As I stood there in shock, Charles tried to cover his tracks with the police officer. "I was just trying to sell it for her. I didn't steal anything. I haven't done anything wrong. Please, let me go," he pleaded, completely contradicting his earlier confession. I remained calm as I addressed the officer. "That's not true. I never asked him to sell anything. He stole those documents on his own, and the ones he took were copies, not originals. Even if he tried, he couldn't have sold them." "You set me up? Don't play games with me," Charles shouted, his voice full of rage. I responded coolly, "You stole them on your own. Now you're just making excuses. Face the consequences of your actions." Angry and cornered, Charles bit his lip in frustration. The evidence was clear, and as a result, he was arrested for theft. News of Charles's arrest and his loss of the $55,000 deposit spread quickly, and his parents were left to deal with the embarrassment. They were forced to leave their town to avoid the shame. However, their bitterness didn't end there. They began harassing the real estate agency, making false accusations and spreading rumors. The agency, understandably furious, filed a lawsuit against them for obstructing business and attempted fraud, as they had tried to sell a property they didn't own. The consequences of Charles and his parents' deceit were far-reaching. My in-laws were financially drained from the legal fees and damages they had to pay. In a desperate attempt, they called me for help. "Patricia, please, we've used up our savings for the deposit, and now we're in debt because of the settlement." My ex-mother-in-law's voice trembled with urgency over the phone. But I felt no sympathy for them. "Why are you asking me for help? I'm divorced from Charles, and as far as I'm concerned, you're strangers to me now," I replied firmly. She begged, "You've got money, right? Can you lend us some? We'll pay you back, I promise." "I don't believe that for a second. I'm ending this call. Don't contact me again," I said coldly before hanging up and blocking their numbers. I'd already blocked Charles's number long ago. Concerned for our safety, especially since Charles knew where my parents lived, I decided to sell our family home. My mother and I moved to a new location to ensure our peace of mind. As for the vacation house, I put it back on the market. It sold quickly, without complications, allowing my mother and me to start over. We now